Victoria Langley drove Darius Bennett down a cracked country road past dead fields toward a house no one had lived in for 20 years. She told him it was hers. She watched his face, waiting for the look she already knew, the quiet calculation, the soft greed dressed up as interest. Every man before him had shown it within minutes. Darius stepped out of the car, looked at the sagging porch, and said one sentence. It was not what she expected. 3 months before that afternoon on the porch, Victoria Langley did not know Darius Bennett existed. She ran Langley Capital out of a glass tower in the financial district, 42 floors above a city that had never given her anything she did not negotiate for. At 35, she controlled a portfolio worth 9 figures and a reputation that opened every door worth walking through. She also controlled with the same precision the distance she kept from anyone who might want something back from her. The first time she saw Darius, he was on his knees beside her car. A flat tire on the shoulder of Route 17, rain coming down in a slow gray curtain. Every other driver going past without slowing. He pulled over in an old pickup, got out without being asked, and had the spare on before she could finish calling roadside assistance. He refused the $100 she offered him. He said his name not at once and drove off into the rain without looking back. She found him because she wanted to. A small detail on the truck, the name of a construction company stenciled on the door, and a single phone call to her assistant. 3 days later, she was sitting across from him in a diner he chose, drinking coffee that tasted like it had been on the burner since morning. Darius Bennett was 38. He was a black man, wide-shouldered and soft-spoken, and he was raising a 7-year-old daughter named Zuri on his own. Her mother had died when the girl was 3. He did not say this over coffee. He said only that he had to be home by 6:30 because someone was waiting for him. And the way he said it was so plain and so full of love that Victoria understood without asking that the someone was small. He built things with his hands for a living, lived in a small house on the edge of town, paid his bills on time, and did not ask her what she did until she told him. He listened the way a man listens when he has nothing to sell. That was the part she could not explain to herself. Every other man she had met in the last 10 years had leaned forward when she talked about her work the way a hunter leans toward a sound in the grass. Darius leaned back. When the check came, he paid it before she could reach for her card, and the bill was less than $20. And somehow that small thing stayed with her for a week. They began to see each other. Not often at first, at dinner at a place he could afford, then a walk, then a longer walk. Their evenings ended earlier than she was used to. He would glance at his watch around 8 and say he had to get back, and on some nights she could feel the quiet pull of another life waiting for him at home. A life with homework on a kitchen table and a small voice asking when he would be there. She told her assistant, Patricia Hollis, to stop scheduling Friday evenings. Patricia, who had worked for her for 11 years and had watched 2 long relationships end in ways that left scars, asked no questions. Victoria was the one asking them silently to herself, because underneath the calm she felt with Darius there was an older voice, and that voice had been right before. It had been right about Thomas, the investor, who spent 2 years telling her he did not care about her money, and then tried to take a controlling interest in her firm during the divorce. It had been right about the one before Thomas and the one before that. Every time she had ignored that voice, she had paid for it, and the price had not been in dollars. The price had been a part of her she never got back. So she watched Darius the way she watched a ledger. She noticed what he ordered, noticed when he did not look at the price. Noticed the cuffs of his work shirts, clean but worn, and the way he talked about his job without ever complaining about what it paid. She noticed that he never asked to see where she lived. 2 months in, she drove him past her building once on the way to somewhere else, and his eyes did not linger. None of it reassured her. If anything, it made the old warning louder. A man that steady, the voice in her head said, is a man who has learned to wait. There is a strange thing that happens to people who have been hurt enough. After a while, they stop looking for reasons to trust and start looking for evidence to confirm what they already fear. The mind, in its effort to protect us, becomes a detective that only takes cases against the innocent. And the more careful the detective, the more certain the conviction. Victoria did not know it yet, but she was not watching Darius. She was watching the shadow of every man who had come before him projected onto the face of a man who was only trying to drink his coffee and get home to his daughter on time. Patricia saw it happening before Victoria said a word. She had known Thomas at least from the other side of a desk. She had carried the folders during the settlement. She had seen how thin Victoria had gotten that year and how much thinner the smile had become after it was over. So when Victoria began leaving the office at 5 o'clock on a Friday, Patricia watched without being told to watch. That was the kind of assistant she was. On a Tuesday morning, going through the week's calendar, she set a folder down on Victoria's desk and kept her hand on it. She told Victoria carefully that she seemed lighter lately and that she hoped Victoria was being careful. She did not mention Thomas by name. She did not have to. It was the kindest thing Patricia could have said, and it landed exactly like a warning. That night, Victoria could not sleep. She sat at the long window of her apartment and looked out at the lights of the city and tried to remember the last time she had trusted someone without an exit plan. She could not. What she could remember was Thomas's voice, the soft and reasonable voice he had used when he explained to the court why half of what she had built should belong to him. She remembered signing the settlement at a table much like the one in her own office and promising herself in the elevator afterward that she would never again mistake patience for love. Darius was patient. That was the thing. By morning, she had made a decision, and the decision had the clean shape of a business move, which was the only shape she fully trusted. She would not keep guessing. She would not keep watching and hoping. She would put him in a room with something worth wanting, and she would see what his face did. Her grandfather had left her a property 30 miles outside the city. 12 acres of flat, open land, a farmhouse that had been empty since the early 2000s, a line on the county record she had quietly renewed every year for 2 decades. The land was worth by the last appraisal close to $2 million. A developer had offered more the previous fall. She had not sold. She had not even mentioned it to Darius. She mentioned it now over dinner on a Thursday the way a person mentions the weather. An old place her family still owned, falling apart. She was thinking of driving out to take a look. Would he want to come along? She kept her voice flat and her hands on her wine glass, and she watched him the whole time she asked. Darius said yes, the way he said most things without any particular weight. He mentioned he would need to see if his neighbor could keep Zuri that Saturday, and when Victoria offered to bring them both, he thought about it for a moment and then said no, not this time. Not because he did not trust her with his daughter, he said, but because he wanted to see what kind of place it was first. A man with a child, he said quietly, learns to walk new ground alone before he brings the child onto it. Victoria nodded and did not know why the sentence stayed with her for the rest of the week. On the drive out, she let the silence work. She told him half an hour in that the land had been appraised recently, and she named a number close to the real one. She watched the side of his face. He nodded the way a man nods at a fact that does not concern him, and kept his eyes on the road signs for her. Somewhere between the last gas station and the turnoff, the old warning in her head went very quiet, almost hopeful. And that was when she knew she could not trust the quiet either. She had come too far with that voice to let it go on a single afternoon. The cracked country road came up. It is worth pausing here because the thing Victoria was about to do is something many of us have done in smaller ways. We say we want to know if a person is real, and then we build a trap to prove that they are not. The trap is never really about them. It is a letter we have been writing to our past selves, asking it to please this time, let us be safe. But the past cannot answer that letter. Only the present can. And the present, if we let it, will almost always surprise us on the condition that we stop sharpening the knife long enough to look up. The dead fields opened on both sides. Ahead, the sagging porch of the farmhouse leaned into its own shadow. Victoria slowed the car, gravel popping under the tires, and told herself she was ready to see whatever he showed her. She was not. Victoria parked beside a leaning fence post and killed the engine. The farmhouse sat 100 feet ahead. The front porch tilted at an angle a carpenter would call dangerous. The silence outside the car was the heavy kind, the kind that had been there a long time. She did not get out right away. She watched Darius, who was looking at the house the way most men looked at a woman across a crowded room. He said the sentence that would stay with her. He said the porch had been a beautiful piece of work once, and that whoever built it had cared about it. Then he opened the door and stepped into the weeds. Victoria sat another moment behind the wheel trying to place what she had just heard. It was not a compliment to her. It was not a comment on value. It was a man speaking about a stranger's craftsmanship, the way another man might speak about a song. She caught up with him at the porch steps. He was already crouched, running a thumb along the edge of a joint where two boards met. He told her the wood was oak, probably cut from the property itself, and that a nail set had been used instead of a hammerhead, which was how you could tell the man had respect for his own work. He said this without looking at her. He said it the way people pray in empty churches out of habit and without expectation. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old paper and a little of animals that had passed through and left. Sunlight came in through a broken window in the kitchen and laid a pale stripe across the floor. Darius walked through the room, slowly touching door frames, testing a stair tread with the weight of his boot. Victoria followed 3 steps behind him and watched his face for the expression she had driven 30 miles to see. It did not come. What came instead in the back bedroom was something she had not prepared for at all. He found a wooden chair with a broken rung in the corner by the window. He picked it up, turned it over, and set it back down on its 3 good legs. Then he went out to his truck without a word and came back with a small roll of tools he kept under the seat. He sat on the floor of a house that was not his in the clothes he had worn to dinner with her the night before, and he began carefully to fix the chair. He said almost to himself that Zuri would like this chair, that it was just her size, and that he would sand the edges down before he ever let her climb into it. Victoria stood in the doorway. She did not know what to do with her hands. She had come here with a plan as sharp as any deal memo, and the plan required him to look at the land and calculate. He was not calculating. He was not even looking at the land. He was looking at a broken chair, and he was mending it with the same quiet attention a surgeon might give to something much more important. He worked for close to an hour. When he was done, the chair sat evenly on all 4 legs. He did not announce it. He wiped his hands on a rag, put the tools back in their roll, and moved on to the kitchen sink where a faucet had come loose from its base. Victoria drifted after him through the house like a guest in her own life. At one point, she opened her mouth to ask why he was doing any of this, and she did not ask because she could already hear the answer. And the answer was that he did not know how to be inside a wounded place without trying to help. They stayed until the light began to go. On the drive back, she did not say much. Darius did not fill the silence. He looked out the side window at the dead fields, then at the first lights of the exits coming up, and once he said softly that someone had loved that house. That was all. When she dropped him off in front of his small house on the edge of town, he thanked her for the afternoon and closed the door gently. Through the front window, she could see a small figure in pajamas run across the living room toward him, arms raised, and she saw him catch her the way a man catches something he has been waiting all day to hold. The warning she had counted on for 10 years didn't say anything at all. And here is the small, quiet thing worth taking with us out of the first part of this story. The tests we design for other people tell us very little about them, but they tell us a great deal about ourselves. When we find ourselves building a stage to see how a person performs, it is almost always because someone long ago stepped off a stage we never agreed to let them stand on, and we have been building that stage ever since, for strangers who had nothing to do with it. The kindest thing we can do when we catch ourselves mid-construction is to put the hammer down and ask what we are actually trying to prove and to whom. 3 days passed. Victoria went to work and ran 2 meetings and signed a document that moved $40 million from one account to another, and none of it reached the part of her that was still standing in that back bedroom. On Wednesday morning, Patricia Hollis came into her office with a folder and a careful face. The careful face Victoria had known for more than a decade. Patricia set the folder down. She said she had not been asked to do this, and she knew she had not been asked. She had done it anyway because 11 years of working for Victoria had taught her what Victoria asked for and what Victoria actually needed. She said she had run a quiet check on Darius Bennett the way she ran quiet checks on any man who came too close. Nothing invasive, only public records, the kind of thing anyone could pull with a library card and an afternoon. Patricia said she had found something that morning that Victoria should probably know about. Darius Bennett had been on the county assessor's website twice in the last week. He had pulled the record for the property outside the city. He had looked at the parcel map. He had looked at the zoning file. Victoria did not move. She thanked Patricia in a voice that came from very far away. When Patricia left, Victoria closed the folder without opening it, and she sat in her chair for a long time, and the voice that had been silent for 3 days came back all at once, and it was very loud, and it was saying what it had always said. A man that steady is a man who has learned to wait. She did not call him that night. She did not call him the next morning. When his name came up on her phone on Thursday evening, she turned the phone face down on the marble counter and went to bed. On Friday, she sent one message brief saying she was traveling for work. She was not traveling. She was sitting in her apartment at the long window looking out at the city lights, feeling the exact thing she had felt the night she decided to set up the test. Darius called twice more and then stopped calling. I have thought about this part of the story more than any other because I suspect most of us have lived inside its shape at least once. There is a kind of silence we choose because we believe it is wisdom, and it is not. It is fear wearing the clothes of wisdom, using words like boundaries and protecting myself, but at the bottom of it, it is only the old panic asking to be kept safe from one more disappointment. What we don't see while we are inside that silence is that the person on the other end of it is not a villain from our past. He is a man sitting beside a phone that doesn't ring, rereading the last message he sent, trying to figure out what he did wrong. And in that gap between his confusion and our certainty, the most honest thing we've had in years is quietly dying, and we are the ones letting it. A week went by. She told herself she was handling it the way she should have handled every one of them clean early before anything could be taken from her. But there was a weight in her chest that had not been there with Thomas or with the one before Thomas, and the weight did not lift. She began to lose sleep in a way she had not lost sleep in years. At work, she caught herself reading the same paragraph of a contract 3 times, and the 3rd time the words still would not arrange themselves into meaning. On the 10th day, Patricia came in again. She closed the door behind her, which she almost never did, and she stood in front of Victoria's desk without sitting down. She said she had something else. She had kept watching on her own the same way she had started watching on her own. She said Darius had not been pulling the parcel map for the reason Victoria thought. He had been pulling historical records. He had been looking for what used to be on the property, specifically the original garden layout from the 1960s, back when the grandfather who left Victoria the land had still lived there. Patricia set a printout on the desk. It was an email Darius had sent to a county archivist, polite and plain, asking whether any photographs of the old garden might still be on file. He wanted to know what had grown there. He was asking, the email said, because he wanted to put it back. He had included a sentence at the end about not wanting to spend money on the wrong plants, and another about wanting his daughter to see with her own eyes something grow again from a place that had been left for dead, because that was a lesson he did not know how else to teach her. Victoria read the message twice. The 2nd time, her hands were not quite steady. She sat with the paper in her lap and understood in a way she could not negotiate with that she had done something she could not undo by being right about it. She had been wrong, and the person she had been wrong about had already stopped calling. Patricia stood there another moment, then said quietly that she was sorry for the part she had played in the misreading. She said she had brought the first folder in too fast. Victoria shook her head. The first folder had not been the problem. The lens Victoria had used to read it had been the problem. She said thank you, and she meant it, and Patricia left the office and closed the door behind her without another word. If there is a lesson in the middle of this story, it is this, said as gently as it can be said. Vigilance is not the same thing as wisdom. A watchful heart and a wise heart can look identical from the outside, but they do very different things to the life around them. A watchful heart treats every kindness as evidence in a trial. A wise heart lets a kindness be a kindness and decides later whether the pattern is one it can lean into. Most of us, if we are honest, have spent years confusing the two. And the only way out of that confusion is not to become less careful. It is to become honest about what we are actually afraid of, and to stop asking the people in front of us to pay for what the people behind us did. Victoria kept the printout on her desk for 2 more days before she did anything with it. She read it again in the morning and again at night, and each time the same small sentence moved through her chest like a slow crack in a wall. He wanted to put it back. She had spent 10 years training herself to hear what men wanted from her, and she had trained so hard she had stopped being able to hear when a man wanted nothing at all. The truth of it settled on her slowly. The problem had never been Thomas. The problem had not been the one before Thomas either. Those men had been real, and the damage had been real, but the damage had hardened into something she now carried into every room. She had taken the wound and made it into a lens, and the lens had begun to bend straight lines. She had not tested Darius. She had tested herself, and she had failed because the test had been rigged from the start. On Sunday morning, she drove to his house. She had been past it once months before without stopping. Now she stopped. It was a small white house with a narrow porch and a pickup in the drive, and it looked exactly like what it was, which was the home of a man who did not owe anyone an explanation. A child's bicycle leaned against the porch rail, pink, with a white basket, and a pair of small sneakers sat neatly by the door. She sat in the car for several minutes before she made herself walk up the steps and knock. Darius opened the door in a work shirt and did not smile. He did not look angry either. He looked like a man who had finished being surprised. Behind him, somewhere in the house, she could hear a cartoon playing softly and a small voice asking who was at the door. He said over his shoulder that it was a friend and that he would be right back, and the ease with which he called her that after everything made something in Victoria's throat close. He stepped out onto the narrow porch instead of inviting her in and pulled the door mostly shut behind him, because whatever was about to be said was not for small ears. He stood with his hands in his pockets and waited. Victoria said the thing she had come to say. She had taken him out to the farmhouse on purpose. She told him the land was worth close to $2 million and that she had mentioned the number on the drive to see what his face would do. She told him that her assistant had pulled a background report on him and had been watching the county records, and that the second report was the reason she was standing on his front porch at all. She did not soften any of it. She did not explain Thomas because Thomas was not his problem. When she was finished, she stood with her hands clasped in front of her and waited. Darius looked at the porch boards for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower than she had heard it before. He said the part about being watched was harder to hear than the part about being tested. He said a man could forgive being measured. Being investigated was a different thing. He said it was especially hard because he knew what it meant for a black man to be the subject of someone's quiet file, no matter how gently the file had been assembled. He said it without accusation, but he did not soften it either. Victoria said she knew. She said she wasn't going to argue with any word of it. He said he had figured out most of the rest on his own, somewhere around the second week of silence. He said he had seen women do smaller versions of the same thing before, and he had always walked away. He said he had almost walked away this time, too. Victoria asked him why he had not. Darius said he did not know yet. He said he had been thinking about it every day, usually after Zuri was asleep, and the only answer he had was that the person who had dropped him off in front of his house that night had not looked like a woman running a test. She had looked like a woman who was afraid of the test working. That was the part, he said, that had kept him from throwing away her number. She did not argue with him. She did not have the equipment to argue with that. Instead, she said she was sorry, and she said it the way a person says it when they understand the word is very small for what it is trying to carry. Darius nodded once. He said he believed her. Then he said something she had not expected, which was that an apology was not the same thing as a plan. He told her quietly that respect had to go both ways, or it did not go at all. He said he was not interested in a relationship where he was the one being measured and she was the one holding the ruler. He said more than that. He had a little girl inside that house who watched everything he did, and whoever he brought into his life he was bringing into hers. And he would not let a woman into Zuri's world who had not yet learned the difference between loving a person and auditing one. If they were going to keep going, she was going to have to give up the ruler. Not for a week, not as a gesture for good. He said it without heat. He said it like a man stating the only terms he was willing to accept. And Victoria understood that he meant every word. She agreed. She agreed because it was the first honest thing anyone had asked of her in a long time. She did not promise him she would be good at it. She promised him she would try, and she promised him she would tell him when she was failing. And that was the promise he took. On Monday morning, she went into the office and told Patricia there would be no more reports. Not on Darius. Not on anyone Victoria might see from this point forward. Patricia listened without expression, then said she was glad to hear it and went back to her desk. It was the closest thing to a celebration either of them allowed themselves. They drove out to the farmhouse the following Saturday. This time Zuri came too. She was small and serious, and had her father's slow, careful way of looking at new things. Victoria had bought her nothing at Darius's quiet suggestion, because love, he had said, should not come with a receipt on the first day. Zuri was polite in the car, and then halfway through the drive asked Victoria if she liked ladybugs. That was the beginning of them. They did not talk about tests or land values on the way. Darius had a list of supplies in his pocket, and a second roll of tools in the back of the truck. Victoria had brought work gloves that still had the tag on them, which she tore off in the parking lot of the hardware store while he was inside. She did not want him to see the tag. It was the first small, private thing she had ever hidden from him for an honest reason. They worked on the house for weeks after that on Saturdays and on the occasional weekday evening when she could leave the office early. He taught her how to hold a pry bar so she would not hurt her wrist. She taught him without meaning to what it looked like when she was tired and pretending not to be. They rebuilt the porch. They replaced the broken kitchen window. They pulled up the rotted boards in the back bedroom where the chair with the mended rung still stood against the wall. Zuri claimed that chair on her second visit. From then on, it was hers. A local man who had known the property in the 1960s came by one afternoon and stood in the side yard and pointed out where the roses had been, where the herb beds had been, where the 2 apple trees had stood. His name was Howard Grayson, and he had been the grandfather's neighbor for a long time. He stayed for 2 hours drinking coffee Darius made on a camping stove, telling them things Victoria had never been told about the man whose name was on her deed. Darius put the garden back the way Howard described it, piece by piece, across one long spring. Victoria helped. Zuri helped in the way a 7-year-old helps, which meant she mostly named the worms and assigned each of them a job. Victoria was not good at the work at first. She got better. Somewhere in the middle of April, kneeling in dirt, she had once thought of only as an asset on a balance sheet with a small girl 2 rows over, humming a song she half knew she understood, that the farmhouse had stopped being a property. It had become the place where she was learning late and slowly how to be a person who did not flinch at being loved. Patricia came out one Saturday to drop off papers Victoria had to sign. She stood at the edge of the yard for a while and watched them work and watched Zuri show Victoria how to water a seedling without drowning it. When she came over to the porch, she only said that the place looked different. Victoria said she knew. Patricia touched her shoulder once the way she had never done in 11 years of working together, and got back in her car and drove away down the cracked country road that no longer looked cracked in the same way. On a Sunday in early June, with the first of the roses just starting to open along the south fence, Darius came and sat down beside Victoria on the rebuilt porch step. Zuri was asleep in the hammock he had strung between the 2 apple trees Howard had helped them replant. Darius was holding a small ring in his palm. It was not an expensive ring. It had belonged, he said, to his grandmother, who had lived in a house not much bigger than this one and had been married for 51 years. He did not kneel. He did not make a speech. He asked her simply if she would marry him. And then very quietly, he asked her a second question, right after which was whether she was willing to be in time and at Zuri's own pace, one more steady thing in a small girl's life. Victoria said yes to both without looking for a catch. That was the part that startled her most afterward when she thought about it. The warning that had lived in her head for 10 years did not speak. It had not spoken in a long time. She slid the ring onto her finger and sat on the porch step beside him and looked out at the garden they had put back together and at the hammock swaying slightly under the weight of a sleeping child who might one day in her own time call her something close to family. And she understood that she had been tested after all on that first afternoon. She had been the one taking the test, and she was only now, months later, beginning to pass it. If there is one thing worth carrying out of this story, it might be this. Love the real kind does not arrive as a reward for being careful enough. It does not show up the moment we have finally gotten our defenses right. It usually arrives a little before we are ready in the shape of a person who will not play the games we have spent years learning, and it asks us quietly to put the ruler down. Not because measuring is wrong, but because some things, a porch mended by a stranger, a child asleep in a hammock, a garden returned to its first shape, can only be received by hands that are no longer holding a ledger. The people who love us well are not the ones who pass our tests. They are the ones who look us in the eye and ask us gently why we are still giving them. And our healing in the end begins the moment we finally have the courage to answer.